Today, the complex task of managing properties. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, working latest posts covering finance and problem news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I'm joined again by George from ITC. Hi George, how are you going?
Fantastic, top of the world, feeling fit as ever. So
That's good to hear for 2021.
yeah, so I'm raring to go, mate.
Now, one of the really interesting things that you briefly touched on in our last show was the complexity of managing a portfolio of properties, rental properties or whatever, from a real estate agent's perspective. Now, I think men will be surprised at just how many obligations there are on real estate agents with regard to health and safety.
Well, the big one is as soon as they enter the property, it becomes a workplace, which means that they have to comply with work health and safety legislation. That means having things like risk assessment templates, consultation records, records in relation to training on emergency procedures, a register of injuries. There should be a register for tradies, so their license, work method statements. What else is there? The contract, appointment of a contractor form. All of these things need to be gathered up and kept on file, because they're essentially managing a workplace, so they've got to actually maintain a safe premises and ensure that it's safe before they bring people through it. And it's not just workers, but it's also people who are visiting the property, inspecting it to possibly buy. So that's one element of risk that is quite clunky and not really, well, in a way it's non-existent at the moment, because unfortunately the industry doesn't adopt a systematic approach in this area.
So just to be clear, this is New South Wales we're talking about, but I imagine that there are some somewhat similar obligations elsewhere as well. Basically, what you're saying is whether it's a rental property or whether it's an open home or those sorts of things, from an agent's perspective, you've got to think of it like an extension to a workplace environment with all of the hazards and risks that need to be managed. I think people will find that absolutely shocking. They will have no idea that that is actually what has to go on behind the scenes.
I know. I shock myself every day thinking about it, but it is the reality. If you have an agency that's managing, say, up to 500 rental properties, every time someone goes into one of those properties, it falls under the definition of a workplace, which then comes under work health and safety laws.
Right.
That's crazy.
So
it's crazy. Yeah.
And how long has that been around? Is that a new? Is that new?
It's always been that case.
Okay.
It's just that it hasn't been monitored properly by, the safety authorities and the consumer protection agencies. I think that they've just basically been clueless on the whole area.
Right.
Of this area of risk for as long as I can remember.
So does that mean that in fact the chances are that many agents will be non-compliant around health and work and safety issues?
Absolutely. Yeah,
right.
It's you've hit the nail on the head.
Right. And what are the implications of that? So if somebody, for example, trips over when they're actually going around an open home, or a worker goes in to fix a problem in a rental property and something goes wrong, does the agent have liability?
Well, this is an interesting point you raise. You'll find many years ago, the insurance companies added a lot of exclusions into their PI insurance policies for real estate agents. And one of those exclusions is bodily injury and property damage. So if the agent, say if there's a curtain rail and in a property and they move the curtain across to the right to show the view outside, and that rod falls off its hinges and comes crashing down the back of the buyer's head, insurance will not cover it. That's an example.
Yeah.
And it's because of the high number of claims that were that the insurance companies had to pay out on many years ago. And one in particular who basically pulled the rug from under the industry in not offering insurance altogether was GIO. And that was like something like 5 years ago. And if we fast forward to now, you'll find most of the insurance companies don't have that inclusion in the actual policies anymore. The risk is just too uncertain, it's unpredictable, and a lot of them are struggling to raise the capital to cover the liabilities that they have in terms of risk. And it's not just in the property sector, it's in other sectors as well, such as building, construction, and legal services and financial services, etc. But yes, the liability risk now for real estate agents and property managers and strata managers, I would say, is through the roof. And what a lot of licensees don't do, Martin, is read the policies and the exclusions that are actually put into those policies. They'll find that bodily injury and property damage is not an inclusion for every property that an agent walks in and out of where there is negligence.
Right.
It is simply, it's simply not part of the cover like it used to be. And that leads to the next point, that what does the agent need to do to avoid any liability or any possibility of being fined or taken to court? And it's pretty simple. They've got to have systems. They've got to have systems and processes in place. So whether that's a software program, spreadsheets, manuals, checklists, they've got to have a process in place where certain control measures are being implemented to minimize that risk and avoid any potential liability that may come their way due to negligence.
Right. So that's
what we're trying to fix.
Right. So George, so there's two issues here. The first is that if they have the right systems and processes in place, so they can demonstrate that they've taken reasonable care and they've done all the reasonable steps that should, always be done, then they can, to an extent, avoid potential liability, right? That's the key point,
Absolutely.
Is it? Yeah, yep. Right. But it requires a methodical set of processes and systems to be able to go property by property by property, to be able to actually demonstrate that they've captured all the appropriate information, risk management processes, etc., etc. Right. I mean, that sounds like a massive, massive workload.
Oh, it's another. It's a whole another layer of risk, and it also requires safety officers. It's like, in a way, it's like an emerging job market within the real estate industry,
right?
That focuses just on health and safety risk and property safety requirements. And that's the job of a safety officer. It wouldn't really be mainly the job of the property manager or the real estate agent. They would have to cooperate and be compliant in terms of duty of care. But because this is a big job, it requires someone to do it as part of their job, as a full-time job. And that's another reason why our product Agent Safe was actually partly funded by the Jobs for New South Wales, with a view to creating new jobs in the area of work health and safety.
So the safety officer, which you've mentioned there, would that be somebody employed, within the agency, or is it somebody coming in from outside to do that particular role?
Within the agency.
Okay.
Yeah, someone employed within the agency.
Okay, so it would be a nominated individual with a specific accountability around
Correct.
the health and safety compliance.
Correct.
And do you know how many agents would actually have that at the moment in New South Wales?
Yeah, look, at the moment, some agencies are doing some good things. They're doing the odd checks around, the smoke alarms, water efficiency measures, swimming pool compliance. They might be doing electrical installation maintenance, but that's sort of where it sort of starts and it ends. they still need to actually manage the risk like it's a workplace. So if a property has, if it's meth contaminated, what other hazards could arise in a property that is meth contaminated? Well, we wouldn't know until we do a risk assessment. So that requires a risk assessment template, or someone to go out there with a person who has the the experience and the qualifications to actually do that job. But then there's a record that has to be created, and we have to make sure that before we bring a tenant through that property, or we allow any worker in that property, that property is decontaminated, and that we've identified all the potential risks that can arise by that property being meth contaminated. That's the level that they've got to get to, and it's they've got to actually adopt what we've been told by regulators, is that the licensees do have to implement work health and safety procedures that are consistent across all properties. So all properties that are managed, sold, or that are under a strata title have to be basically managed in accordance with work health and safety laws. And that would require, it requires like a software program or spreadsheet tools that are implemented by the licensee, or it could be a compliance officer or someone who is appointed to take on that responsibility, and to make sure that every time someone enters that property, Martin, they're entering a safe workplace. Do you know there are reports out there that certain workers won't go out there to read water meters because they don't know if they're walking into a property that is safe or secure? They've got no idea. And this comes back to the fact that you've got to do safety inspections. You don't have to be a building inspector to do this. It's just really identifying hazards, knowing the health and safety compliance laws, and having those records, and just and having some accountability around just general safety and security matters that are present in properties or likely to arise in properties. And it's not just the safety requirements like your smoke alarms, your swimming pool fencing, your locks and security. It's also any material facts that could pose a significant health and safety risk to anyone entering that property. And that could be loose filled asbestos, that could be lead paint, that could be mold. And having those records there and having some documentation there to show that this has been addressed, or if it hasn't been addressed, there is something that's being done about it. Yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done. And look, some officers out there are doing some good things, but overall it's, I would say we're non-compliant.
Right, okay. Now,
I'll say that mildly, Martin, I'll say it mildly. But yeah, it's what we are seeing out there is certainly it's going to make it very hard to remain insurable in the future.
Okay, very interesting. Now, let me just give you one scenario. On auction day, you have an auctioneer sitting out the front, and you've got 50 people down the road. Do health and safety conditions apply then as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, it all just starts with a safety inspection. I mean, there's two types of safety inspections. There's one where you just do a walkthrough to make sure that there is, there's nothing that could, cause injury or illness to anyone entering that work site. So there's no trip hazards or anything that could fall on top of someone's head. And then the other safety inspection is the actual safety requirements, and that probably wouldn't apply to an auction. But I mean, if you're going into a rental property and you're doing an ingoing inspection, you've got to make sure there's a working smoke alarm in the property. If there's a swimming pool, you've got to make sure that the pool fence meets safety requirements. Has the electrical installation been checked by a competent person? Are the locks and security accurate? If there's a dividing fence, is the dividing fence adequate in a reasonable state of repair? So there's that element of it too, Martin. But to go back to what you said earlier with the auction, they've got to make sure that anyone coming on that site, and this is the licensee and their employees, that anyone coming on that site is coming on a site that is safe and secure as a workplace.
And one other question, does the auctioneer and the agent both have obligations?
Both. Yeah, the auctioneer's got a responsibility to make sure that there's nothing that could cause injury to anybody who's participating in that auction.
Right.
So he should do some sort of walkthrough. But the ultimate responsibility lies with the licensee in charge. He's the controller of the premises. By law, he's deemed the control of the premises. So he needs to have that discussion with his contractor, who would be the auctioneer, and there should be some sort of appointment of a contractor form. And that auctioneer would have responsibilities under that agreement to comply with work health and safety laws. And even if they've got someone working with them, they've got to make sure that that person has workers' comp, they've appropriately trained to minimise any safety risks, and the liability is also with them. So everyone's got a responsibility, but the ultimate responsibility does lie with the licensee in charge, because they're deemed to be the PCBU, which is the person conducting a business undertaking, which comes under the work health and safety legislation. The employer is known as the PCBU, person conducting a business undertaking. So they've got a job to make sure that any employees or any contractors that they appoint cooperate with what needs to be done to make sure that workplace is safe. And if they don't follow that, then they can be liable, or they can be fined, and it can sort of all unravel from there. But yeah, look, there's not too many auctioneers you'll see go out there and do an actual safety inspection. I think I've heard Edwin in the past on your show mention about a lot of them don't even do the walkthrough to make sure that the property is in reasonable condition, and the property they know what they're actually selling, or any material facts that have to be disclosed. That type of inspection isn't even being carried out. So look, there's a lot of work to be done there on auction day, in terms of risk minimisation, in particular safety, minimising that safety risk. And it's just not being done.
Well, every time I talk with you, George, I get more and more insights into the complexity of the industry. Now, you mentioned agent safe. Can we just go into that in a bit more detail and try and understand what it is and how it works?
Yeah. So Agent Safe is a work health and safety management software program for all properties. It's also available in 5 states. It's available in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, and WA. And it just makes it easier for the industry to comply with all these requirements. It's going to be very hard for agencies who have got a very large caseload of properties to get on top of this, Martin, because there's been too much focus in the past on the on cash flow and obviously getting volume of properties to generate that cash flow they need. The focus needs to really be on quality assurance. And the other problem is the fees that the industry's been charging is more concentrated towards administration, which unfortunately doesn't add a lot of value to the owner's property. There needs to be more focus around the compliance, the risk management, and the other area is really looking at the property to make sure that it's safe to bring people through. And it's not just the employees, it's the contractors that you bring through to do work also. This is where the fees need to be more concentrated towards. And this is what adds value and saleability to the properties. So what you're going to see is that eventually there's going to be a shift more towards quality assurance, having the volume of properties at a reasonable level that can be easily managed and ensure that the property managers are meeting their responsibilities. And yeah, that's going to be hard to sort of get it to that level if you're an office that's got, say, 1,000 to 2,000 rental properties. It's going to be very, very difficult. Those offices are going to have to look at consolidating at some point, because our fear, Martin, is insurance, PI insurance. One of the reasons Jobs for New South Wales were happy to help fund 50% of the project costs of the product was the fear of insurance and litigation and other things that could really disrupt the industry in the future. And it's not just Agent Safe. There are other software products out there now that can serve a similar purpose and make it very easier for agents to meet their obligations. But it is going to be very hard to get to that level that we all want to achieve, because it's gone so far the other way. But there are huge opportunities, and that's what we want to see, is that the opportunities that all this presents to the industry and the consumer in the future. And with the right attitude and the right planning, it can definitely be done. And we've actually developed checklists that can be downloaded for free from the Agent Safe website, which will help the industry get started to just to get their head around what things need to be identified, what things need to be recorded, and what really presents a major risk for the owners. Because the owners it's interesting, if there isn't a working smoke alarm in the property and there's a fire, at the end of the day it's the owner who pays the fine, not the real estate agent. There may be a claim for negligence against the agent, but it's the fine is paid by the owner. So you're not only having to protect the workers going into these properties, you've got to protect the owners in terms of the safety requirements that they have to adhere to. You look at defence housing, Martin, I can tell you now, you talk to the community housing centres, they'll say that it's very rare to find a community housing centre that has any more than 400 properties on their books. Well, it's not uncommon to find a real estate agency that has more than 600 rental properties on their books, and it can go up from there. So we have to focus more on quality assurance and really protect our tenants. Yeah, got to really protect our tenants. The tenants are the ones that are suffering out there.
Well, George, I think one of the key takeouts from today is that if you are a property owner or indeed a property investor and you're going to hire an estate agent to manage your property or sell your property, then you should ask them about their processes with regards to health and safety and how they manage it. Because at the end of the day, the truth is that the buck stops not with the agent, but with the owner of the property.
It does. It does. And look, a lot of the owners wouldn't have a clue about what we're talking about here, unfortunately.
Yep.
They wouldn't be aware that they've got people going in and out of properties doing different things, and all sorts of incidents can arise. And that's been a fear of the insurance companies. They say, well, what can possibly go wrong in a property? The risk is so unpredictable that we just don't know how to write that risk into our policies. So systematic approach, safety checks, just having those records, having someone, trained to do that job is is absolutely necessary. I said to you before, some offices are doing some really good things. We've got some clients that are doing some really good things, like, you know, with the smoke alarm management, the electrical installation management. They're going right across the board, and they're starting, you know, from the beginning and sort of working their way through, you know, their checklists, and they're doing it quite well because they don't have as many properties as, say, another office might have. And you know, they're hell bent on achieving what they've got to, and you know, they see some real opportunities in the future to enhance their portfolio, but to also you know, to also get that respect from the community, and to make their job easier, because it's a very tough job. Any form of property management is very tough if you don't have good records with work orders, you know, repairs and maintenance, making sure that the owner complies with health and safety laws. It's just very difficult, and you know, you just can't adopt that ad hoc approach that the industry has adopted for so long. You know, the landscape's changing, Martin, and it's changing very quickly.
So you mentioned Agent Safe. What's the website?
Yeah, so it's agentsafeforrealestate.com.au, and I would just say to your viewers, just go on there, have a look at the case studies, read about the product, have a look at the resources page to see the checklist that we've got on there, and yeah, just educate yourself and to see what's happening out there in this space, and you know, where it's all heading, because safety and security management of properties, whether it's properties for sale, rental properties or strata properties, is definitely the way of the future. We're seeing what's happening in the building construction side of things with the multi-level buildings, and what they're trying to address there in relation to structural integrity. Martin, that's only 50% of the problem. The other 50% of the problem is what we've discussed today.
Well, George, thanks for that. Really important messages there. We'll put the links below, of course. And I really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome, Martin. Thank you for having me.
This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.